So picture this. You walk into a room and you see this old man just sitting in a chair.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right. And he is looking at a cup of tea that is just resting there on the windowsill. But here is the specific detail that should, like, immediately catch your attention.
What's that?
He has been sitting in that exact same chair, doing this exact same morning routine for 37 years.
Wow. 37 years of just sitting there.
Exactly. Every single morning, he wakes up before dawn, brews the single cup of tea, places it on the windowsill to cool, and then...
Let me guess, he drinks it.
No.
Yeah.
He does absolutely nothing with it. He never drinks the tea.
Really? He just leaves it.
Just leaves it. He simply sits there and watches the steam rise, curl into the air, and then completely vanish into the absolute stillness of his little cottage.
That is an incredibly striking image.
Yeah.
It really borders on cinematic, in its total isolation.
It totally does.
You can practically feel the profound quiet in that room just by visualizing, the slow dissipation of that steam into the cold morning air.
It really pulls you in, right? And that vividly atmospheric scene is the starting point for the source text we're diving into today.
It's a great piece.
It really is. So we are looking at an excerpt titled The Letter That Was Never Sent, which comes from a larger, just fascinating work called The Architecture of Remembering.
Which is such a great title, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. So the mission for this deep dive today is to really unpack this hauntingly beautiful narrative. We want to figure out what this story, and honestly, what this strange, isolated old man tells us about human memory.
And about the crushing weight of self-doubt.
Yes, exactly. And most importantly, about the physical spaces we construct in order to, quiet the relentless internal noise in our own heads.
Right.
So, okay, let's unpack this, because this story takes this very abstract, sometimes fluffy concept of self-help.
Which can feel a bit cliche sometimes.
Right. It really can. But it takes that and turns it into a literal, physical, three-dimensional environment.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that while this narrative certainly reads like a fable or, a piece of literary fiction, it actually functions as a rather profound psychological blueprint.
It's a blueprint for what, exactly?
Well, as we talk through the events of this story today, I want you, the listener, to think about your own daily routines. Think about the habits you have built, maybe without even realizing it.
Like reaching for your phone first thing in the morning.
Exactly. And think about the internal noise you might be desperately trying to silence. We all have that background hum of anxiety or criticism.
Oh, for sure.
And we all have our own versions of that undrunk cup of tea, even if we don't necessarily recognize them as such right away.
That is such a good point. So let's look a little closer at this old man's incredibly specific morning ritual.
Let's do it.
We have this deliberate, heavy stillness inside his cottage. But you have to contrast that with the outside world. The text tells us that his neighbors, well, they call him strange. Yeah, and the local children actually dare each other to go up and knock on his door. To the outside world, he is basically just the weird hermit at the top of the hill.
Right, the neighborhood mystery.
Exactly. And the text explicitly notes that none of them have ever spoken to him long enough to understand what actually lives behind his pale gray eyes.
Society generally does not know what to do with people who cultivate absolute stillness.
We really don't. We're so uncomfortable with it.
We are. We're culturally conditioned to equate movement with purpose. If you are not doing something, producing something, or constantly interacting with someone...
You're immediately suspicious.
Exactly. You're viewed with immediate suspicion. The neighbors are basically projecting their own discomfort with silence onto him.
That makes a lot of sense.
They see his lack of external engagement as a deficit, but they completely miss the fact that his internal world might be incredibly active, or at least deliberately and carefully managed.
Well, his management tool is just odd, though. The undrunk tea, I kept thinking about this while reading the source.
What did you make of it?
It's almost like he is leaving a daily offering for his own peace of mind. The tea isn't for hydration. It serves absolutely zero biological purpose.
None at all.
It's an anchor. It is a physical timer for his stillness. As long as that tea is cooling, as long as that steam is rising, he has a job to do.
Right.
And that job is to simply exist and observe.
What's fascinating here is that the psychological utility of that mundane object is the real key to understanding his routine.
How so?
Well, if you are going to sit in a chair for 37 years, you need something to anchor you against the relentless passage of time.
Right.
And against the wandering of your own mind.
Because the mind will wander to some dark places if you let it.
Exactly. The T grounds him in the immediate present. It is incredibly hard to spiral into panic about the past or, dread about the future when you are actively forcing your brain to track something as subtle and immediate as steam dissipating into the air.
You're locking your focus on the physical reality.
Right. He is using a physical process to regulate a psychological state.
Hmm.
The external world judges him, sure, but the internal peace he achieves through this daily anchor is completely impenetrable.
Impenetrable, yeah. But building an impenetrable sanctuary of silence is also kind of fragile, isn't it?
It definitely can be.
Because what happens when the outside world finally breaks in? The whole story basically hinges on an interruption.
The storm.
Yes. This carefully constructed, silent world of his gets a sudden, violent shock from the outside. And this interruption forces us, as the audience, to finally look past the cooling tea and see what is actually hiding inside this cottage.
Right. The inciting incident completely shatters this 37-year routine.
So on the night of the last full moon of autumn, a massive storm rolls in. And there is a knock at the door.
A real knock this time, not just the kids playing a prank.
Right, exactly. A young woman arrives. She is singed to the bone from the freezing rain. She is totally lost on the hill roads. And she is carrying this leather satchel that the text describes as looking older than she is.
Which is a great little detail.
It is. So the old man, staying entirely true to his quiet nature, just lets her in. He doesn't say a single word.
He just opens the door.
Yep. She goes to sit by the fire to get the warmth back into her hands. And as the firelight illuminates the room, she finally realizes the secret of the cottage.
Which is the defining feature of the space that the text has withheld from us until this exact moment.
Right. So every single surface, the walls, the shelves, the floorboards, looping around the door frames, even pressed into the dark corners, is covered in thousands and thousands of handwritten words.
It's everywhere.
The entire interior of the house is completely wallpapered in text. She's just stunned. So she asks him what it all is.
And what does he say?
He hands her his cooling cup of tea and says simply, "Letters to myself."
Wow.
And every single one of these thousands of letters begins with the exact same phrase, "I need you to remember."
See, it completely flips our understanding of the character.
It really does. I was shocked.
Because we thought we were looking at a story about a man who had emptied his life out.
Right.
Someone who had embraced total minimalism and Zen-like silence.
Like a monk.
Exactly. But his physical space is overflowing. It is screaming with desperate, urgent communication. He hasn't emptied his mind at all. He has externalized it onto the actual architecture of his home.
And the specific things he needs to remember are just, well, they're gut punches.
They really are.
The source gives us 3 examples of these letters, and I want to look at them one by one because they are incredibly revealing.
Let's hear them.
So the first one she reads on the wall says, "I need you to remember that the fear you feel at 3 in the morning is not a prophecy. It is just weather. It will pass."
Reframing nighttime anxiety from a prophecy to weather is such a vital psychological maneuver.
It really changes how you look at it.
Because think about it. At 3 in the morning, the world is completely dark and silent. There is no external sensory input to distract your brain, so your internal fears become the loudest thing in the room.
It's just you and your anxiety.
Right. And from an evolutionary standpoint, waking up in the dark triggers a low-level vigilance. Your body genuinely thinks it needs to be on high alert.
So when you are lying there spiraling about your career or your relationships, your brain genuinely believes it is predicting a disastrous future.
Exactly.
It feels like a prophecy.
And the panic basically overrides your executive function. The executive function is the logical manager part of your brain that you need to calmly assess a situation and realize, oh, I'm just having an anxiety spike.
But you can't access that part.
No, because when the amygdala, which is the brain's fear center, is firing at 3 in the morning, logic shuts down. But by labeling it weather, the letter reminds him that a storm feels terrifying and all-encompassing when you are standing in the middle of it.
But it always passes.
Exactly. It's a natural phenomenon that always eventually moves on. You don't try to fight a thunderstorm. You just wait it out.
That is so powerful. And that makes the second letter she finds hit even harder.
Remind me what that one says.
It says, "I need you to remember that the version of you who failed was not the whole story. It was a single sentence in a very long book."
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Because we are incredibly prone to a cognitive distortion called overgeneralization.
Overgeneralization.
Right. We take one negative event, like one massive failure, and we let it rewrite our entire narrative identity. We stop seeing ourselves as a complex person who happened to fail at something, and we start seeing ourselves simply as a failure.
Right. We let the single sentence become the title of the book.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. Reducing the failure back down to its proper scale, a single sentence allows the rest of the book to exist. It allows for redemption and growth in the following chapters.
I love that. And then we get to the third specific letter the text mentions. It says, I need you to remember that stillness is not emptiness. It is the space where everything real begins.
The thesis statement.
It really feels like the thesis statement for the old man's entire existence. But okay, here is where it gets really interesting to me looking at all three of these. If he wrote these incredibly profound, comforting things to himself, why did he physically plaster them over every single surface of his house?
It's an extreme interior design choice.
It really is. Why not just keep a nice letter journal in a bedside drawer? Like, is he trying to literally, physically live inside his own advice?
Well, keeping a journal in a drawer requires active retrieval.
Meaning you have to choose to go get it.
Right. When you are panicked at 3 in the morning, or when you are just drowning in a sense of failure, you do not have the cognitive bandwidth to remember the journal exists, calmly walk over to the drawer, flip to the right page, and read a soothing passage.
Because, like you said, the panic overrides logic.
Exactly. The panic overrides the ability to seek help. But by building this literal architecture of remembering, he has bypassed the need for active recall completely.
Because it's unavoidable. He has basically outsourced his coping mechanisms to his drywall.
Yes. We talk a lot in behavioral psychology about choice architecture.
Choice architecture.
Yeah, it's the concept of designing your environment to make good decisions the path of least resistance. For example, if you want to eat healthier, you don't just rely on willpower.
You stop buying junk food.
Right. You take all the junk food out of your kitchen and you put a bowl of apples on the counter. You engineer your physical space to support your goals.
Ah, okay. So he has essentially taken choice architecture and evolved it into, like, emotional architecture.
That's a brilliant way to phrase it.
Yeah.
He has designed a space where it is physically impossible to forget his own hard-won wisdom. He doesn't have to summon these positive thoughts from the depths of a panicked mind because they are structurally holding his house together.
Wow.
Wherever his eyes happen to fall in a moment of despair, the environment itself intervenes.
But surrounding yourself with thousands of your own desperate reminders begs a massive question.
It does.
The young woman sitting by the fire and looking at all these looping words, she actually asks the exact question we as the reader are thinking. She turns to him and asks, did they help? The letters.
And his answer is the emotional climax of the narrative.
It really is. He folds his hands, sitting in that exact same chair by the windowsill, and says, I don't know.
I don't know.
He admits he cannot even remember writing most of them. He looks at the walls and doesn't even recognize his own state of mind when he penned those words.
Right.
But he tells her every morning when he sits there and watches the steam rise from the tea, something inside him grows quieter. He describes it to her as a noise he had stopped noticing was finally gone.
Such a specific feeling.
So she asks him what noise he means, and he closes his eyes and says, the voice that always asked if I was enough.
The voice that always asked if I was enough. I mean, that is the universal human antagonist right there.
It really is.
That is the core inner critic that drives the sleepless nights, the anxiety, and the fear of failure that he wrote about on the walls.
And immediately after he says that, the text notes that neither of them speak. The rain outside completely stops.
The storm breaks.
Yes. And there is a silence that the author describes as arriving, quote, not when nothing is happening, but when everything that needed to happen already has.
That's beautiful.
So what does this actually mean for his healing process? The fact that he doesn't even remember writing the letters anymore.
It's fascinating.
It's almost like the thousands of letters act as emotional acoustic panels in a recording studio.
Oh, I like that.
Right. He doesn't need to stand there and read the words every single day. Their mere physical presence absorbs the echo of his inner critic. The room is permanently soundproofed against self-doubt.
The emotional acoustic panels analogy perfectly captures the mechanism at play here, because this raises an important question about the very nature of self-regulation.
How so?
We frequently treat self-help and therapy as an academic exercise. Like, we operate under the assumption that if we just memorize the right quotes or logically unpack our trauma, we will achieve a cured state.
We treat it like studying for a test.
Exactly. We think we need the data. But the old man's experience highlights a profound paradox. He forgot the specific lessons. He lost the intellectual data of his own advice.
But the act of having written them, The
Yes.
actual physical labor of externalizing the pain and then surrounding himself with the evidence of his own survival, that is what fundamentally changed his mind's baseline frequency.
Healing, in the context of this story, isn't about perfectly memorizing the right answers for a pop quiz on happiness. It is about altering the environment of the mind until that questioning voice simply runs out of energy and fades away.
Wow.
The letters did the heavy lifting during those dark years so that the man could eventually just sit and watch the steam. The letters fought the battle so the man could finally enjoy the peace.
Okay, so he has successfully neutralized his inner critic and built this perfectly calibrated sanctuary.
Right.
But we can't forget about the young woman. She just stumbled into this highly sensitive ecosystem, soaked to the bone and carrying her own baggage.
Her own literal and metaphorical satchel.
Exactly. So how does this intensely personal sanctuary impact her?
Well, this brings us to the ending, which is perhaps the most layered and challenging part of the entire narrative.
I am so glad you used the word challenging because honestly, I was incredibly frustrated reading this final scene.
Really, tell me why.
Okay, so the storm passes. Morning comes, the air is clean. Before the young woman leaves to continue her journey, she asks the old man a very simple favor. She asks if she can take just one of the letters off the wall to keep with her.
And he shakes his head gently and refuses.
Right. He says, "They're not mine to give. They were never mine to begin with. They belong to whoever needs to read them next."
It is a response that feels deeply unsatisfying on a first read.
Unsatisfying is putting it mildly. Let me push back on this because it genuinely annoyed me.
Go for it.
He has thousands of letters. He just admitted he doesn't even remember writing half of them. He tells her they belong to whoever needs to read them next. Well, here is a lost, soaked traveler who is explicitly asking for help and clearly needs guidance. And he actively refuses to give her a single piece of paper. It seems like a massive contradiction.
It does seem that way.
It feels like an old hermit hoarding his enlightenment and disguising it as deep wisdom.
I completely understand the frustration. It looks like an act of selfishness. But we have to look closely at the difference between giving someone an artifact and giving them a practice.
Okay, explain that.
If he tears a letter off the wall and hands it to her, what is he actually providing? He is giving her a souvenir, a piece of paper that contains an old man's specific coping mechanism for an old man's specific pain.
But the advice was universal. Fear is weather. Failure is one sentence. Why couldn't she carry that with her?
Because reading someone else's realization is entirely different from doing the cognitive labor to arrive at that realization yourself. It is the difference between handing someone a prescription meant for another patient versus teaching them how to diagnose their own illness.
I see.
If she takes his letter, she will look at it when she is sad, and it will always remain his voice comforting her. The physical paper was not the gift he intended for her. The framework was the gift.
Oh, they were never mine to begin with.
Exactly.
The truths are universal, but the application has to be personal.
She cannot take his physical letter because she needs to do the difficult work of writing her own. By refusing to give her the easy out, the souvenir, he forces her to reckon with the empty space in her own mind.
I see it now. Because the healing for him wasn't in reading the letters on the wall, as we just established.
Right.
The healing was in the desperate late-night act of writing them. The emotional acoustic panels only absorb the noise if you build them with your own hands.
Perfectly said. And look at what happens to her immediately after he refuses. She doesn't leave angry.
No, she doesn't.
As she walks down the hill away from the cottage, she feels a quiet certainty rising like steam.
Rising like steam.
She has already internalized the metaphor of the undrunk tea. She realizes she is exactly where she needs to be.
And the text actually jumps forward in time to prove this point. It tells us that later that winter, the young woman is in a rented room far away from the hill, and she begins writing her own letters to herself.
And how do they start?
She starts every single one with his exact framework. I need you to remember.
By passing on the structure instead of the artifact, the old man gave her the tools to find the quiet that was already waiting beneath her own thoughts.
That's incredible.
The text states that in the stillness between her own written words, she finally hears what he tried to describe to her by the fire. Not a voice, not a new thought, but the profound quiet that had always been there, waiting patiently beneath the anxious noise.
It is a generational transfer of a psychological tool. He didn't give her his answers. He gave her the prompt so she could unearth her own.
Exactly.
It completely reframes his refusal. It wasn't selfish at all. It was the ultimate act of empowering someone. And honestly, it leaves you looking at your own mental architecture as a reader.
It really does.
Like, what are the spaces between our thoughts built out of? Are they constructed from fear and prophecy, or are they built out of reminders that we are enough?
It challenges us to look at our own walls, metaphorically speaking, and examine the script we have running in the background of our lives.
So, to bring this entire narrative together for you listening, we started with this incredibly vivid, slightly bizarre image of an old man anchoring his existence to a cup of tea he never intends to drink.
Right.
We explored how he took his internal self-doubt, his 3 in the morning panics, and literally externalized them, designing an emotional architecture to support his mind.
The acoustic panels.
Yes, we saw how those physical letters acted as a soundproof buffer, eventually starving his inner critic of oxygen. And finally, we saw how true stillness isn't just an empty room you stumble into, is an active, demanding practice, a framework that we must construct for ourselves, word by painful word.
It is a beautiful journey from isolation to genuine connection, not achieved through endless conversation, but through shared practice.
It really is.
And it leaves us with something quite powerful to consider moving forward.
What's that?
Think about the old man's forgotten letters covering his walls. If he can no longer remember writing them, do they cease to be his personal journal and simply become universal truths?
Oh, wow.
Imagine if you sat down today and wrote out exactly what you needed to hear in your darkest moment. Now imagine you stumbled upon that exact piece of paper 37 years from now, completely forgetting that you were the author.
That's wild to think about.
Would you recognize your own voice? Or would it just sound like the quiet certainty you had been searching for all along?
I absolutely love that thought. And maybe, just maybe, the next time you pour yourself a cup of coffee or tea, you won't take a sip right away. You'll let it sit on the windowsill for just a minute or two. Not for hydration, just to watch the steam rise, track it as it vanishes into the air, and see what kind of noise finally starts to fade away in the background.